Welcome to Let's Read Mobile, presented by the Boys and Girls Clubs of South Alabama. I'm Michelle, and my grandkids call me Mimi, so you should call me Mimi too. And I'd like to read you one of my favorite books. It's called The Rough-Faced Girl, and it's by Rafe Martin and David Shannon. And it's about a young Native American girl, and what she learns about herself. Once, long ago, there was a village by the shores of Lake Ontario. I'm just going to stop and say one of the things I love about this book is that I think the pictures are so pretty because they're like paintings. So I'm going to start again. Once, long ago, there was a village by the shores of Lake Ontario. Off from the other wigwams of this village stood one great, huge wigwam. Painted on its sides were pictures of the sun, the moon, stars, plants, trees, and animals. And inside this wigwam there was said to live a very great, very rich, powerful, and supposedly handsome, invisible being. However, no one could see him except his sister, who lived there too. Many women wanted to marry this invisible being, but his sister said, only the one who can see him can marry him. Wait a minute, I think. Well, there. Now in this village there lived a poor man who had 3 daughters. The 2 older daughters were cruel and hard-hearted, and they made their younger sister sit by the fire and feed the flames. When the burning branches popped, the sparks fell on her. In time, her hands became burned and scarred. Her arms became rough and scarred too, and even her face was marked by the fire, and her beautiful long black hair hung ragged and charred. And those 2 older sisters laughed at her and said, "Ha, you are ugly, you rough-faced girl." And they made her life very lonely and very miserable indeed. One day, these 2 older sisters went to their father and said, "Father, give us some necklaces and some new buckskin dresses. Give us pretty beaded moccasins, and we're going to marry the invisible being." So their father gave them these things, and dressed in their finest, the 2 girls marched through the village. All the people pointed and stared. "Oh, look at those beautiful girls," they said. "Surely they shall marry the invisible being." And if those 2 girls were proud and hard-hearted before, they were even prouder now. They walked haughtily through the village. At last they came to the wigwam of the invisible being, and there was his sister waiting for them. "Why have you come?" she asked. "We want to marry the invisible being," they answered. "That's why we're here." "If you want to marry my brother," she replied, "you have to have seen him. So tell me, have you seen the invisible being?" "Of course we have seen him," they insisted. "Can't you see how pretty we are? Can't you see the beautiful clothes we are wearing? Yes, anyone can tell that we have truly seen the invisible being." "All right," she said quietly. "If you think you have seen him, then tell me, what is his bow made of?" And suddenly her voice was swift as lightning and strong as thunder. "His bow?" they stammered in surprise. "Oh, we know." But turning desperately to one another, they whispered, "What shall we say? Let's say it's the oak tree." So they said, "It's the great oak tree." "No," said the sister of the invisible being, "no." And she saw at once that they had lied to her. "Tell me," she continued, "if you think you've seen my brother, the invisible being, then what is the runner of his sled made of?" "Oh, we know," said the 2 sisters. But whispering feverishly again, they wondered, "What shall we say? What shall we say? Let's say it's a green willow branch." "No," said the sister when she heard that answer. "No, you have not seen my brother. Now go home." "Just test us fairly," they said. "We have seen him. Just don't ask all these silly questions." "All right," said the sister of the invisible being. "Come with me." So she took them back to the great wigwam and sat them in the seats furthest from the entrance, the guest seat. Soon they had heard footsteps coming along the path, and something stepped inside. And though they heard breathing, the 2 sisters couldn't see anything. Suddenly a great bow and a beaded quiver of arrows appeared in the air and were set down. And though those two girls sat there, their eyes wide, all through that night they never saw one thing more. And in the morning they had to go home, ashamed. The next day the rough-faced girl went to her father and said, "Father, may I please have some beads, and may I have a new buckskin dress and some moccasins? I'm going to marry the invisible being, for wherever I look, I see his face." But her father sighed. "Oh, daughter," he said, "I am so sorry. I have no beads left, only some little broken shells, and I have no buckskin dress. And as for moccasins, all I have left are my own old, woven, cracked, stretched out pair from last year, and they are much too big." But she said, "Whatever you can spare, I will use." So he gave her these things. Then she found dried reeds, and taking the little broken shells, she strung a necklace for herself. She stripped birch bark from the dead trees and made a cap and a dress and leggings, and then with a sharp piece of bone, she carved in the bark pictures of the sun and the moon and the stars, the plants and the trees and the animals. She went down to the lake shore and soaked the moccasins in the water until they grew soft, and then she molded them to her feet. But they were still too big, and they flapped like duck's feet as she walked. Then all of the people came out of their wigwams, and they pointed at her and stared and said, "Look at that girl." They laughed. "Look at those strange clothes. Hey, 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 go home, you ugly girl. You will never marry the invisible being." But the rough-faced girl had faith in herself, and she had courage. She did not turn back. She kept walking right through the village. As she walked on, she saw the great beauty of the earth and the skies spread out before her. And truly, she alone, of all in the village, saw in these things the sweet yet awesome face of the invisible being. At last she came to the lake shore just as the sun was sinking behind the hills, and the many stars came glittering out like a fiery veil in the darkening sky overhead. And there, standing by the water's edge, was the sister of the invisible being, waiting for her. Now, the sister of the invisible being was wise, and when she looked at you, she didn't just see your face or your hair or your clothes. No, when she looked at you, she would look you right in the eyes, and she could see all the way to your heart. And she could tell if you had a good, kind heart or a cold, hard heart. And when she looked at the rough-faced girl, she saw at once that though her skin was scarred and her hair was burnt and her clothes were strange, she had a beautiful, kind heart. And so she welcomed her dearly, saying, "Oh, my sister, why have you come?" And the rough-faced girl said, "I have come to marry the invisible being." "Oh," said the sister very gently now, "if you want to marry him, you have to have seen him. Tell me, have you seen my brother, the invisible being?" And the rough-faced girl said, "Yes, I have." "All right then," said the sister, "if you have seen him, what is his bow made of?" And the rough-faced girl said, "His bow? Why, it is the great curve of the rainbow." "Ah," exclaimed the sister in excitement. "Tell me," she said, "if you have seen my brother, the invisible being, what are the runners of his sled made of?" And the rough-faced girl, looking up into the night sky, said, "The runner of his sled? Why, it is the spirit road, the Milky Way of stars that spreads out across the sky." "Ah," cried the sister in wonder and delight, "you have seen him. Come with me." And taking the rough-faced girl by the hand, she led her back to the great wigwam and sat her in the seat next to the entrance, the wife's seat. Then they heard footsteps coming along the path closer and closer, and the entrance flap of the wigwam lifted up, and in stepped the invisible being. And when he saw her sitting there, he said, "At last, we have been found out." Then smiling kindly, he added, "And oh, my sister, but she is so beautiful. And his sister said, yes. The sister of the invisible being then gave the rough-faced girl the finest of buckskin robes and a necklace of perfect shells. Now bathe in the lake, she said, and dress in these. And as the rough-faced girl bathed in the waters of the lake, the scars began to vanish from her body, and her skin grew smooth, and her black hair grew in long and glossy as a raven's wing. Now anyone could see that she was indeed so beautiful, but the invisible being and his sister had known that from the start. Then at last the rough-faced girl and the invisible being were married, and they lived together in great gladness, and because they got along so well, they were never parted. And that's the end. Thank you for joining us today, and don't forget to watch next time. Until then, let's read, Mobile.